Okay, the 12th entry into the MCU in chronological order is the ninth film of the overall franchise, and that is Captain America the Winter Soldier. Let's get right into this. Overall, I love this movie. I loved this movie when I first saw it a decade ago, and I love this movie now. Captain America the Winter Soldier is one of the greatest movies of the MCU, and it's one of the best comic book movies ever made, period. Everything about this movie, to me, is a flawless victory. Now, this movie came a part of Phase 2. Now, before the release of Captain America the Winter Soldier, you had Iron Man 3 and Thor the Dark World. From a critical reception, mixed bag. From a fan reception, mixed bag. From my personal reception of those two movies, didn't really care for them. So to me, in order for Phase 2 to maintain my interest, Captain America needed to do something to suck me in. And from start to finish, this movie did exactly that. Compared to what came before, this is one of the more darker movies of the MCU. This is one of the more somber movies of the MCU. And this is one of the most important movies of the MCU because it changes a lot of the status quo. Like, so much good stuff happens in Captain America the Winter Soldier. There's very few negatives. Yeah, the negatives for this movie are very few and far between. And when I get to them, I'll get to them. But like I said, they're very minute. And they ain't going to take away from the overall grade at all. So without further ado, let's just go over this thing right now. So let's kick it off first with the cast. The cast in this movie is phenomenal. Chris Evans, to me, puts on his best performance as Steve Rogers / Captain America. This man goes on an emotional roller coaster in this movie. And it's amazing. And by the end of it, you get the sense, you wonder, you know why Captain America Steve Rogers has such an optimistic attitude about himself. Is that he gets put through the ringer, but his never say die attitude always continues to make him prevail. In addition to Captain America struggling to adjust to the modern world, he has to deal with real world problems. He has to deal with the fact that the old school values that he has, they don't jive with what's going on in the modern context. You know, he's doing covert operations with SHIELD, but he's starting to learn that SHIELD, does a lot of shady stuff in order to get the job done. And what they do is it's for a greater good, but they take a lot of shortcuts. And there are moments where SHIELD acts like the villain in a lot of those instances. Captain America has to wrestle with the fact that, the world is not as black and white as it used to be. There's a lot of shades of gray. In order to have world peace, you gotta manipulate a little bit, and you gotta pull some strings in order for that to happen. Steve Rogers has to wrestle with a lot of those conflicts. Like, his old school values comes into conflict with these new values, in which, in order to have world peace, you need to privatize it, and you need to have government control over it for it to happen. Steve does not agree with that. He believes in the power of the people, and those, like I said, that clashes with with the values of SHIELD, especially when you get deeper into the movie and you find out that SHIELD is actually Hydra in disguise. It makes everything all the more problematic and more complicated for Steve Rogers. And like I said, in addition to all that, he has to wrestle with the fact that his best friend Bucky, who he thought to have died during World War II, is now back, but as a brainwashed assassin known as the Winter Soldier. Like, Rogers has got so much he's got to wrestle with, and Chris Evans does a phenomenal job at portraying the character in this movie. One of my favorite scenes when he gets reunited with an older Peggy who is suffering from dementia. That scene is so heartbreaking and so touching, and you can just see the pain that Chris Evans gives Steve Rogers in that scene. Like, he's with his favorite girl, but his favorite girl is leaving him. And you can just see that he's missed so much. He's been gone so long. Everything he knows is gone. Everything he loves is gone. He's literally a man out of time. Like, the only connection that he has to his old life is Peggy. And with Peggy's failing health, even that's starting to leave him. A beautiful, tender scene and a bittersweet reunion between Steve and Peggy, who are a very underrated MCU couple that should have gotten more development. But you know what? Just seeing it, all the better. But in addition to that, Steve does have some good things that happen to him in this movie. We get the introduction of Sam Wilson, played by Anthony Mackie. I think that Chris Evans and Anthony Mackie have really good on-screen chemistry. I like the dynamic of Captain America, of Rogers and Wilson. I think they play off really well off one another. I like how Sam Wilson is is quick to jump at the side of Captain America, almost being inspired by him a little bit. But I also like how Wilson also, wants to help Rogers as well, wants to help Rogers trying to cope with living in this new world by having him attend VA meetings and stuff like that. So I like that stuff. Like the budding friendship and partnership between Rogers and Wilson is in this movie. And of course, Wilson plays a nice role in the third act of this movie as well, where he teams up with Cap and Black Widow to take down Hydra Shield and the helicarriers. All this, that was great. Scarlett Johansson, she returns as Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff. I like the fact that this is like a buddy cop movie in which is Steve Rogers and with Natalia tagging along. I think they have a really good dynamic with one another. Of course, since they're both part of S.H.I.E.L.D., it only makes sense that Black Widow and Captain America would be on these missions together. I like the dynamic. I like the chemistry between Chris Evans and Scarlett Johansson. A lot of this movie's humor comes from these two, but it's not that cringy Marvel humor. It's humor that serves the story. For example, there's this one scene where they're on the run and they're hiding in the mall, so they have to do like these awkward couple things in order to throw the scent off themselves. That's the Marvel humor used to its advantage. And you have other like humor like that peppered all throughout, but it never undercuts any of the dramatic tension that this movie brilliantly builds up. And that is how Marvel should use its humor. It should use its humor to serve the story, not undercut the story. Very little dramatic tension is cut off by that cringy humor, which to the credit of the Russos, makes them one of the best directing duos in the entire MCU to do movies, because they don't undercut their humor. They don't undercut their tension with bad humor. They have the humor serve the story, and they use that humor as a way to throw the scent off the characters. I love that stuff. It's great. And like I said, Evans and ScarJo have good on-screen chemistry, and ScarJo also has some cool little action sequences peppered all throughout this movie as well. You have a great supporting cast. Nick Fury. Samuel Jackson returns as Nick Fury. He has a nice little action sequence at the 30-minute mark where he's getting attacked by a bunch of cops, and then you get the introduction of the Winter Soldier. Like Nick Fury actually has a chance to have an action sequence, and it's a pretty badass action sequence as well. I like it a lot. I like this whole idea of Nick Fury not being able to trust anyone. Of course, this is the movie that where Fury gives a pseudo explanation as to how he lost his eye. Of course, if you watch Captain Marvel, it makes this story go from being mysterious and somber to stupid. Hence why Captain Marvel is a piece of shit for a movie, because it undercut a lot of good things and it made everything as a joke. Pretty much Fury gives this speech like, the last time I trusted somebody, I lost an eye. He said with such serious conviction. But when you watch Captain Marvel, I'm like, dude, a kitty cat scratched your eye. And yeah, you're not as badass as you want to portray yourself. This is why I can't stand movies like Captain Marvel, especially when you watch it in context with the greater MCU. It makes a lot of mysterious things that could be cool into just comically stupid, and it undercuts a lot of the badassery of certain characters as well. That movie's a blight on the MCU. Captain Marvel was a joke. But enough about that piece of garbage. Yeah, Nick Fury in this movie, great action sequences. I like the tense relationship that he has with Rogers. I like a lot of the scenes that they have together and the conversations. I love the story of Nick Fury telling a story to Rogers about his granddad, how he used to operate an elevator, and how he slowly started to not trust people anymore. That's who Nick Fury really is, and he's somebody with a lot of trust issues, and has a very small inner circle of people who he does put his trust into because he knows that they won't betray him. I like that stuff. It adds a lot to Fury's character. And Samuel Jackson, this man couldn't put in a bad performance if he tried. He's too good. The whole subplot of Fury faking his death, that is something that Nick Fury would do in order to throw the scent off himself. So yeah, I got no complaints with that whatsoever. Good stuff. You have Robert Redford, who plays Alexander Pierce, who was who was more or less the guy who was above Nick Fury. I like Robert Redford in this movie. I think Alexander Pierce is one of the most underrated villains of the MCU. Why do I think he's underrated? He's an underrated villain because Alexander Pierce, his motivations is that in his mind, he's doing the right thing. And that right thing is eliminating any threat to him and to Hydra at all in order to compartmentalize world peace. Alexander Pierce is that villain who has motivation that you understand. He's not a mustache twirling villain. He's a villain with a lot of shades of gray. He actually makes points that you kind of agree with in a way. The way he goes about it is completely wrong, to the point where he kills his own housekeeper as a way to keep everyone silent. But he's also one of those villains that you will see in a political thriller. Somebody who has a duplicitous nature, like he shakes your hand, like he's shaking your hand up front, but stabbing you in the back with the other one. But in his mind, it's a necessity to stab you in the back because it's for a greater cause. And I just thought Robert Redford just put in a great performance all throughout. I like the on-screen chemistry that he has with Fury. I buy these two as being longtime friends. I like the story that Alexander Pierce tells Captain America about how he and Fury became friends, about how Fury helped him escape a foreign country that was under siege. You know, a lot of history. I mean, see that story that Pierce tells. When you watch this movie, you can piece that together, and how Fury could have lost his eye or stuff like that. Like, you know, something that was cool, something that informs his character, something that he did. Like, listen, that's neither here nor there. I'm trying. I know Fury telling a story about how he lost his eye is like a small, minute thing, but in the greater context of the MCU, it could be something important because it was completely just destroyed with Captain Marvel. But yeah, Alexander Pierce, one of the best villains. One of the most underrated villains of the MCU. And of course, I love how he's the handler of the Winter Soldier, and how he's basically the one who controls the Winter Soldier and gives him all his mission reports. Great stuff. Like Pierce is such a slime bag son of a bitch that he uses a brainwashed Bucky to do his wet work. Love the character of Alexander Pierce. Love Robert Redford in the role. He can play Pierce as being this charming, likable guy, and then he can flip that switch and make him into this slimy, grimy son of a bitch who you want to see get defeated so bad because he's such a manipulative person. But yet what he says has conviction. Yeah, can't say enough good things about the underrated Alexander Pierce and a very underrated performance by Robert Redford. Yeah, in terms of the overall cast, that pretty much rounds out my thoughts on that. I think everyone in this movie played their roles exceptionally well. Now I know I'm missing Bucky Barnes with the Winter Soldier. No, I'm not. And I'll tell you why I'm not. The reason why I'm not, because the Winter Soldier, he's not much of a character in this movie as he is a force of nature. And how the Russo brothers handle the Winter Soldier, I actually thought they handled the Winter Soldier really, really well. He is presented as this force of nature, as this lingering threat that could pop up at any moment. He's got that, he has an intimidation factor to him. He's got that eerie music that's very reminiscent of Hans Zimmer's theme for the Joker in The Dark Knight. Like, every time you hear that screeching sound, you know that business is going to pick up and that the Winter Soldier is near. And I thought Sebastian Stan, from an overall physicality standpoint, played the role extremely well. And I like how we get a little bit of history as to how Bucky was able to survive his fall from the train at the end of First Avenger. You know, he was found by Arnim Zola and the Russians. Arnim Zola brainwashed him to be a killing machine for the Soviets, and the Winter Soldier is credited for having many assassinations over the course of a 50-year history. Like Steve Rogers, the Winter Soldier is a man out of time, but he's a man whose identity has been taken away from him, and now he's just a brainwashed killing machine. And of course, the rivalry between Captain America and the Winter Soldier is what really makes this movie, to me, stand out above the rest. Now, does it take precedence over the overarching story, which is Alexander Pierce and Project Insight and the decimation of all of threats to Hydra Shield? No, it doesn't. But as a personal story, yes, absolutely. As a personal story, yes. This is Steve Rogers pretty much trying to save his friend from the brainwash that has become of him. And this is beautifully illustrated in a nice flashback scene where Bucky tells Steve that he's with him to the end of the line, and that scene's called back, and there's a nice callback to that scene during the climax where the Winter Soldier is about to kill Cap, but then Cap repeats that line, and that opens up something in Bucky's head where he starts to remember again. And I love that stuff. I think Sebastian Stan gives a very understated performance as the Winter Soldier. Many would say he's underutilized in a movie that shares his name. I don't. I think the Winter Soldier is utilized just right, because in Civil War, he gets more expanded upon. This movie was meant to lay down the groundwork for the Winter Soldier and his eventual road to redemption. Like, you can't do all that in one movie because it will take away from the Winter Soldier as a character from what he is, which is a badass in this movie. Winter Soldier is killing every single person in this movie, and he takes he takes great joy in it. This man does not care. He's like the Terminator, and like I said, Sebastian Stan plays the role perfectly. And when you get to the third act, where humanity strikes to strike back, the conflict that Sebastian Stan's able to portray, really understated, very underrated. Yeah. Can't say enough good things about the Winter Soldier's handling in this movie. To some, underutilized. To me, utilized just right, because it doesn't take away from the overall narrative, and it creates a beautiful personal story for Cap. Again, nothing bad to say. All good, all good, all good. Of course, you have a nice little cameo from Toby Jones as Armin Zola, and it's actually Armin Zola had put himself. So, according to this movie, Armin Zola was suffering from a degenerative disease, so in order to save his mind, he put his mind into computer databanks, and now he's a machine. And it's actually through Armin Zola where Cap and Widow find out that Hydra has been infested with S.H.I.E.L.D. this entire time, and it was actually Hydra that orchestrated the assassinations of Tony Stark, of Howard Stark, and all perceived threats to Hydra S.H.I.E.L.D. I love this stuff. It was nice seeing Toby Jones return as Armin Zola, as a computer monster. Great stuff. In addition to that, I also like a lot of the actors who are part of the strike team that Cap leads. You know, you have Frank Grillo, who plays Brock Romlow, who eventually becomes Crossbones. I like Grillo in this movie. I think he was really good. A lot of the fight scenes that he's in are grossly entertaining, especially the elevator scene at Hydra S.H.I.E.L.D. I think that scene is completely badass, and he has a cool battle with the Falcon near the end of the movie as well. So yeah, I think Frank Grillo as Crossbones. I think Frank Grillo as Romlow was really good. And of course, the ending of his character is to set up his eventual turn to Crossbones in Civil War, where he gets burned alive but barely survives. So yeah, got nothing bad to say about that. Frank Grillo and the scenes that he's in, I love it. And I like how for a good portion of the movie, he's more or less treated like a secondary antagonist, and the Winter Soldier is more or less that ace card that you pull out when all else fails. So I like how that was handled as well. Like you managed to give Romlow some good screen time. When you compare it to Civil War, Romlow was handled much better in Winter Soldier than he was in that movie. Though in Civil War, but in Civil War, his character actually, whatever. When I get to Civil War, I'll explain it better. I don't want to spoil too much. This is not a Civil War review. This is a Winter Soldier review. So yeah, again, I can't harp enough on the cast and the characters and how well handled this movie handled every single part of them. So with all that now I got that out of the way finally, let's talk about the action sequences. A lot of the action sequences in this movie are phenomenal. The opening scene where Captain America and Black Widow, along with the Strike Force, are attacking the Aluminum Star ship, I think is a great fight scene. The fight scene that Cap has with George Batroc, played by George St. Pierre, was a very entertaining hand-to-hand combat scene. And I like how this movie mixes up Cap's fighting style. Like, you have scenes where he's doing hand-to-hand combat, and you have scenes where he's doing some gunplay and some shield play. Like, there's a lot of variety in this movie in terms of the fight scenes. I think the hand-to-hand combat scene with Batroc and Cap is very entertaining. I would have stretched it out just a little bit, but that's just me personally. Like I said, the whole Nick Fury car chase scene. I thought that was very entertaining as well. The elevator scene where Cap is taking on all of Team Strike is like one of the best scenes in this whole movie. The hand-to-hand combat scenes that Cap has with Winter Soldier are also very tightly directed, very tense. Especially the first one where Winter Soldier catches Cap's shield for the first time, and you got that what the fuck moment. So much good shit. And of course, you got the whole third act where Hydra S.H.I.E.L.D. initiates his plan of Project Insight to eliminate all the threats to them with the 3 helicarriers. And you got Sam, Widow, and Cap all doing their best to try and take these things down. You know, Black Widow was doing her covert ops by posing as a member of the World Security Council as order to throw off Pierce. You got Cap and Falk. You got Cap and Wilson trying to handle the strike team along with the Winter Soldier. Like so much good things is happening in that third act. It's hard to pin it all down. So yeah, can't say enough about the third act and the action sequences in this movie. They're all handled very, very well. And I like how some of the new characters are handled very well. You have Sharon Carter. She's introduced in this movie. She eventually becomes a pseudo love interest for Captain America. Her introduction was in this. She has a nice little role in this movie, and I thought Sharon Carter was handled fairly decently. And you also have Maria Hill, who makes her return from Avengers. She has a nice little role in this movie as well. Every character has a little something to do, and they all do something that serves the story. So I can't say enough good things. Wow. Okay, so I think I've covered just about what I want to cover with Captain America: The Winter Soldier. At the end of the day, this movie to me is a 10 out of 10. This is one of the best MCU movies put to screen. Not only that, this is one of the best comic book movies ever made. Almost a decade later, Captain America: The Winter Soldier still holds up because it's the best told story, and it's a movie that Captain America: The Winter Soldier is one of the best examples of how good the MCU can be when they're able to broaden out their horizons. You get a great movie like this. So yeah, Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Once again, 10 out of 10. If you have not seen this movie in a long time, check it out. You're gonna love it. I guarantee it. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comment sections down below. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more. Also, side note, I like the two mid and post-credit scenes. I like how the mid-credit scene sets up Baron von Strucker, Scarlet Witch, and Quicksilver, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson and Elizabeth Olsen, respectively. Of course, when you get to Age of Ultron, Baron von Strucker gets treated like a punk bitch jobber. But at least I like the initial setup for his character and for Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver in this. And also the end credit scene sees Bucky, who had pretty much to the end of the third act, Bucky nearly kills Cap, but then he has a change of heart and he ends up saving him. Of course, this further complicates Bucky's path to redemption. But the end credits of this movie sets up Civil War and Bucky learning more about his past. So yeah, good stuff all around. Okay, now that I got all that out of the way, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll check it back next time for more.